Growing extremist movements and radicalisation in Australia. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee, because we're going to talk about the latest inquiry into extremist movements and radicalisations here in Australia. Now, I know John Adams and Martin North have done a video looking at this. I haven't watched it yet, but you may want to check it out. John called me up, and he's quite passionate about this topic. Now, due to my cultural background, being of German and Austrian descent, let's just say I am quite concerned with the growing trend of collectivist authoritarianism that seems to be permeating Australian political power. We can certainly see that happening on the left. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of concern about far-right, nutters and growing movement there. But really, it comes down to a different way to think about these things. Are you advocating for a collectivist movement with growing government control over people's individual lives, or are you advocating for a more individual liberty and responsibility focus with a smaller government or government closer to the level of the people? Now, if you can see, some of the far-right activists, shall we say, are quite closely aligned with the authoritarianism and ideological opinions with, the authoritarian leftists. There's a lot of crossover there. And I honestly, I'm concerned because this is happening more and more. Now, you're going to see a lot of talk about radicalization and terrorism, and I wanted to show, a video I did last year. And in this video, people were claiming that far-right radicalization is the biggest threat in Australia. Now, that statistically is unfounded. And I wanted to look at this map. This is a terrorist alert map that they updated with just terrorist attacks all over the world. And unfortunately, it's been taken down, or they have no longer updated it. I'll link to this video. I still have it up on my Facebook channel. It's probably one of the few that did quite well on Facebook before I got frustrated with the platform. Essentially, it was the lies that Koshy was putting out there. Koshy and Hinch were putting out there with regards to Pauline Hanson. And if you look at just the terrorist attacks all over the world, they're either religiously motivated, ideologically motivated, or politically. The good old commies. That proletariat worker revolution is still fighting. They're still trying. They're still committing acts of violence. We even had, literally, up the street, in a suburb near from me, we've just had an attack. A nutter, radicalized nutter, killed several people. So it's an issue. And before we look at this inquiry, there's, two arguments I want to put forward. Here we've got an example of a self-radicalized guy. He ended up moving out from his parents, and he said he couldn't live with non-believers. He's ideologically motivated. Now, I would argue there's an issue that we have of intergenerational culture clash. Say you have someone moving over, migrating to Australia, and we're starting to see it manifest in some of the gang violence that's occurring in Melbourne, but it's not really spoken about that much in the media. But hear me out with this theory. You've got parents who are moving over. They've come from a culture or an environment that in some ways would be quite traumatic to a lot of people. War-torn, they've had to flee. And they come over here and they settle in Australia. And then they have their children here. They're either too young to remember back home, or they barely do, and they grow up here in Australia. And they have Australian problems. They have first world problems and issues. And they can't, they are unable to relate, or their parents are unable to relate to those issues because of all of what they've come through. So you have this intergenerational culture clash in the same family, and that can lead to isolation and other issues. What happens with, you can see an example in the States with all the single or fatherless young men there, all the issues that leads to. That's the most significant indicator of violence. Now, that's one concern there. And that has to be discussed in the public, this potential for this intergenerational culture clash in individual families. How do you reach out and how do you address it? How do you stop these people from resorting to extremism or to gang violence as a way of addressing these issues, or just falling into that trap? Now, the other issue that we have here in Australia, I would say, well, it's one of utter hopelessness, everyone. One of utter hopelessness. And I'm bringing this one up here. You know, good old housing, guys. Good old housing. You've got people that believe that there's no chance at all of getting ahead, of living the Australian dream. It just seems to be tougher and tougher and tougher. And this, I would say, the sense of hopelessness is what's resulting in people losing their faith in the government and then resenting Australia. If all you see in the media is the government giving handouts or supporting particular groups of people, or, you know, giving significant discounts to foreigners when you're just struggling to get into a property, that breeds resentment. You lose faith in the government that you have. And then depending, I'd say, on your cultural background or your heritage, you're probably going to turn to something that can give you at least some meaning or some purpose or a justification or an answer to what's going on. Well, then what do you have? That adds a level of danger in a multicultural society, because then you have people splintering off. Tribalism will emerge. There's historical precedent for that. That can't be dismissed. It's just natural. It's a part of nature. So this is the thing. The government is creating a situation of hopelessness for younger generations. And what are they going to do? You've got growing Marxist movements here in Australia. These are the ones that scare me more than anything. The Marxists, the Socialists, because they have political power. They have sway on the Greens. They have sway on the Labour. And you're going to have a greater push against, or a greater encroachment of our freedoms and liberties by the government. And I honestly, based on historical precedent, that will not address any of the issues. That's not going to address the hopelessness that people feel when they can't even afford a home, when they can't even get ahead, when they feel like everything is stacked against them. And this isn't just one particular racial group or religious group. This is uniform across the whole country. I would say it's a generational group, a generational issue. The young guy here, look at him. He's in his 20s. His family were normal. He couldn't stand living with them because they were disbelievers. Hopelessness, guys. That's what it leads to. And they're going to throw more and more money and resources at, addressing what they think the real issue is. When, if you can get ahead, if you can have an opportunity, if there's a chance of a future, do you resort to ideological craziness? I'd say you don't. I think it comes out of hopelessness. And if we look at all of the movements that are around the world, what's driving them? A lot of them is hopelessness. And the biggest issue we have now is, though, that one can self-radicalize. It's a lot easier to do it. So if you get isolated from your community, but then you find a group that you can identify with, you now be in a bubble. We're seeing that here. We're seeing that with all these authoritarian leftist movements here in Australia. We're seeing it with the rampant growth of a religion based on guilt for the modern industrialized economy. You've got to pay your tithes. You've got to pray to Greta, light a candle, feel guilt. What do you think's going to happen? This is the concern. So they're doing this inquiry into extremist movements and radicalism in Australia. And let's go through this, everyone. So the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security has commenced an inquiry into extremist movements and radicalism in Australia with the terms of reference from the Minister of Home Affairs. The requested reporting date for the Minister is April 2021, and you can make a submission. Let's have a look at his terms of reference, everyone. So, Mr. Andrew Hastie. So, we wish to refer to the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, the committee, matters relating to extremist movements and radicalism in Australia for inquiry and report. Now, my concern is that they miss out or they ignore all the extreme leftist authoritarianism and socialism that is growing in our culture, that is growing in our communities. The fact that you've got Antifa, the fact that you've got BLM protests, the fact that you've got radical environmentalism looking to shut down our entire economy. That's radicalism, guys. That's ideologically driven belief systems. You talk to anyone and try and put a counter argument. I put a, you know what? I'll bring it up. I'll put a image up on my channel where we looked at just the amount of, we have it here, the amount of sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. Just, last Friday when I did this, someone shared this app with me. And you can see over China, the industrialized hub of the world, was 150.4 milligrams per square meter, and Australia over Sydney was 6.4 milligrams per square meter. And so many people saying, no, you need to think about it per capita. But, okay, you've got a whole system, the globe. Chemistry doesn't adjust per capita. It's not going to make any difference. If you're concerned about the environment, you have to ignore the per capita thing, sadly. And then they're trying to, they believe that us as Australians, we should feel guilt. We should feel guilt and pay the tithes and penance for the fact that we're exporting natural resources to other countries that are making a fortune off it. So, to me, that seems utterly irrational, and it shows a lack of understanding of the implications of what they're talking about. The per capita thing is fine when you're looking at GDP in an abstract sense and the impact it has on people, but when you're looking at a closed system and from an environmental perspective, it's not really relevant. You need to look at whole numbers that are going to have an effect. The per capita you may want to look at over time, but then the projections over time, the modeling is probably as accurate as our, wage growth modeling and all of the other economic modeling. This is the problem with a lot of the environmental stuff. It's a lot of the long-term modeling becomes less accurate the further you get into the future, particularly the economic aspects of it. If you've ever worked with any of this stuff, you know how easy it is to manipulate as well. So that's why I'm not worried. It's a slow move. Environmentalism is a slow-moving issue. The world isn't going to end in a few years, everyone, like people are saying. That is, the fear, the end of the world concern there. That is ideologically driven, everyone. That is aligned with many cults and many religions, where they believe that the world is coming to an end with a certain time period and only the believers will be saved. You need to make sacrifices. A lot of them are vegans too, as well. There's some crossover there, and you've got to look at what they feed people in cults to reduce their mental capacity and their physical strength. Really, they deprive them of healthy food. They just give them gruel and slop and vegetables and things like that, as opposed to the meats and fats that allow you to develop the mental capacity to think straight. And I'm not being facetious there, everyone. That is proven. That is real. That is my concern. If anything, because I want to look at some of the parliamentary inquiries and the presentations and have a look at it, I want to make sure that we get a balanced representation of the radicalism that is prevalent here in Australia. And my concern is the Overton window has shifted so far to the authoritarian left that they're not going to notice that radicalism has started to permeate some of their political organisations. Look at some of the completely unfounded policies that Labor's putting forward. They believe in a wage gap. They believe that it actually exists when it can be statistically proven that it doesn't. It's an earnings gap. It's completely different. But that's subtle. They don't understand that. It doesn't align to their radicalized ideological position. So, terms of reference. I request that the committee consider the following terms of reference in conducting this inquiry. The nature and extent of and threat posed by extremist movements and persons holding extremist views in Australia, with a particular focus on, what's the focus on? The motivations, objectives, and capacity for violence for extremist groups, including but not limiting to Islamists, far-right-wing extremist groups, and how these have changed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, okay, this is the problem right there. They're completely ignoring all of the leftist groups. There's the one. Okay, well, there's a call right there. What about the violence from the left that's occurring? the potential there. I used to map it all out. I had a map where I would, on the HeiseSays, the freedom map, where you've got universities, policing speech, stopping people talking, where you've got groups of radical students making false claims about abuse and assault on the university campuses for political purposes. You've got where you have people like Bettina Arndt unable to talk on campuses because people are screaming and screeching. That's a concern as well, everyone. Frankly, I think that's more of a concern than the far right wing, frankly, because they have more political power, the left. The far righties, most of them, I mean, how significant is it? And what actually is the definition of the far right? How many of them are just disenfranchised Australians that have lost all hope and are just trying to find a group that they can relate to? And then the problem is you get trapped in a social media bubble, no different to the Islamists, no different to the Greens, and you can't hear anything else. You become an ideologue. That's the biggest danger. The risk to the community of high-risk terrorist offenders. The geographic spread of these extremist movements and persons in Australia and their link to international extremist organisations. 3. Without limiting the other matters that the committee may consider, issues for specific inquiry are A. Changes that could be made to the Commonwealth's terrorist organisation listing laws to ensure they are fit for purpose, addressing current and emerging terrorist threats, reflect international best practice and provide a barrier to those who may seek to promote an extremist ideology in Australia. Now, the concern is what they consider extremist ideology. I think what John is referring to in his video is that some of the arguments that Thomas Jefferson is putting forward would be considered an extremist ideology in Australia. I'm not at all surprised. Australians aren't very liberty-focused. It's not part of our culture. We still haven't rebelled from the monarchy, everyone. B. Changes that could be made to Australia's counter-terrorism strategy in relation to preventing radicalisation to extremist views, including capacity for future partnership approaches with state, territory and local governments. C. The role and influence of radical and extremist groups, which currently fall short of the legislative threshold of prescription, in fostering disharmony in Australia and as a conduit to persons on a pathway to extremism. Now, I would say, and maybe this is just showing that I've got radical views, I would say that a lot of the green ideology is a radical and extremist group. People who are arguing for the complete deindustrialization of our civilization, of our nation, and putting carbon taxes on normal people. I would say that's radical and extreme because of the fact that it's going to have absolutely no impact at all. And I'm not making this up. This is a quote from our chief scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel. If the world was to reduce its carbon emissions by 1.3%, what impact would that make on the changing climate of the world? My response was that the impact would be virtually nothing. That's what he said. Then he went on to defend that, saying, we still need to set an example. It's the guilt there. Think about it. There's a term in economics. It's called an opportunity cost. If you do something, there's a cost to not doing it, to doing something else. So I decided to spend this morning making a video on this. I could have done something else. There's an opportunity cost of doing this. As maybe I could have relaxed and had breakfast, right? It's a Sunday. I could have mowed the lawn. So this is probably kind of better. I don't want to mow the lawn, but with regards to economics, say you're a farmer. And you make so much a year, you could go and get a job. You could go get a job and work in an office or something. There's a difference in earnings. It's the opportunity cost there. Now, if we've got people advocating radical and extremist views of significantly reducing our economic capacity, the ability of our economy, the quality of life of average Australians for absolutely no benefit, that opportunity cost isn't close to infinite. Doesn't that seem like a radical and extremist approach to to appease people's feelings and guilt? But that's the problem. If you don't see it like that, it's not going to get addressed. What do you think is going to have the greater threat on the quality of life for the average Australian in the next 50 years? A bunch of people LARPing in the bush radicalized ideologues, or a government that is steadily reducing our freedoms and quality of life? Let me know in the comments, guys. So D, further steps the Commonwealth could take to disrupt and deter hate speech and establish thresholds to regulate the use of symbols and insignia associated with terrorism and extremism, including online, giving consideration to the experience of other countries. Now, this is probably the most concerning thing. Once you regulate speech, you remove the ability of a multicultural society to evolve. Cultures evolve, grow, share, and change. The idea of multiculturalism, and this may be an extreme view according to the government here in Australia, the idea that multiculturals can live together harmoniously without the potential for any conflict, there's no historical precedent for that. You need to ensure that there's the capacity for communication and dialogue where bad ideas are cleansed by sunlight. But that doesn't seem to go with the nice little PC view people have on the world. They just want everyone to be polite and pretend they tolerate each other. There's some elements of certain cultures here in Australia which are quite shocking, which need to be addressed, which you don't want to continue for the next 200-300 years. But this could associate with that. This is the problem. Free speech is an important thing, and then banning symbols and insignia associated with terrorism and extremism. This is all coming down. Can you see where this can go, everyone? This can result in less freedoms for the individual. And, who will pay the price, everyone? It'll be normal people that cop this. Further steps the Commonwealth could take to reinforce social cohesion, counter violent extremism, and address the growing diversification of extremist ideology in Australia. Well, I can tell you one thing right now. Give people more opportunity. Get out of the way. The government needs to get out of the way of our lives. That's you'd be amazed how many people feel hopeless, and what do they turn to? The role of social media, encrypted communication platforms, and the dark web in allowing extremists to communicate and organize. Any other matter relating to these terms of reference, noting the roles and responsibilities of states and territories in Australia's counter-terrorism arrangements and constitutional limitations. Taking into account other priorities for the committee, I ask that the committee report on its inquiry by the 30th of April 2021. Subject to your agreement and recognising the sensitive nature of some aspects of this inquiry, the committee should, as far as possible, conduct its inquiry in public. Well, fantastic. That's good. I've copied this letter to the Attorney General and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So, you have... Oops, I haven't brought that up. Hang on. We'll jump over here. I'll link to it. You have the capacity, everyone, to make a submission to the inquiry. You can prepare a submission, as people did with the cash ban. My concern is the limitation of it to simply extreme Islamists and the far right. I can understand. I drive through Logan every week. I can understand why they're concerned with Islamists. But what about the far left? What's going to have a longer impact on our lives? What's killed more people throughout history? Authoritarian governments, everyone. That's the greatest threat to our freedoms. So I thought I would help bring everyone's attention to this, because it's something that may slip under the radar. Most people are concerned. They don't appreciate the fact that this radicalization can impact us. Well, this legislation to address radicalization can impact average Australians. And how many people might actually be considered? You might have radical views, everyone, according to the Australian government. I consider myself quite a level-minded centrist with regards to politics. I'm probably more independent-minded than a lot of people, but that's due to well, my upbringing and my cultural background concerned with collectivism. We've seen what collectivist thinking can have, and strong government regulation of people's lives. We've seen the outcome of that throughout history, through last century. You can see what happened in Germany. You can see what happened in the Soviet Union, everyone. This collectivist ideological thinking is dangerous. It is growing here in Australia. And it's not just the radicalized ideologues that you see running around that are the worry. It's not the people LARPing in the bush that are the worry. It's the fact that it's permeating our political organizations and parties, and people are feeling hopeless. I still think there's hope to shift the Overton window and to get a more sensible, to activate more normal people to shift our politicians' point of views. What you have to understand is those who make the most noise wield a disproportionate amount of political influence. And it's time for the average person, the silent majority, the sensible person, to actually put an effort in. Because if you don't make noise, your freedoms and liberties are going to be taken away. Well, there you have it, guys. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. Do you think this is a good outcome, or are you concerned that they seem to have limited what they're looking at? As always, thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to go through and organize a live stream where we'll watch some of the presentations to this inquiry. Make sure you join in for that. But this is an ongoing thing. There's still time until February to get at least some public engagement with this. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and want to support the content I create here, there are a few ways you can. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us using our affiliate links to Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or AussieBroadband. You can buy our merch from HeiseSays, use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, or support us via PayPal. Take care, everyone, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.